be one of the key growth engines. And the growth engines of a church are going to look different. And again, when we talk about growth, we're talking about spiritual growth, all those next steps people are taking toward Christ. But also, I want healthy churches to grow too. I want healthy churches to reach more people for Jesus and to extend the gospel mission that we're on together. And so we want both. But what I see, Chris, and it sounds like you're confirming from both your research and just the experience you've had working with churches too, is that when churches treat small groups as a program, that it's very difficult to get traction. But when small groups are part of that natural path, the next steps that you're asking people to take, and really a core to those growth engines of the church, and treating it like we do our weekend services, it sounds like. And then in those instances, you're really seeing traction.
Yeah, I see time and time again that when small groups are on a long menu, when you've got, for instance, a Sunday night service, a Wednesday night service, a Tuesday night Bible study, a Thursday night prayer service, and all these are good things in and of themselves. But when they're competing and they're just programs with small groups are going to lose because there's accountability there. It's an extra step to actually be a part of a small group. And so if you add it just onto a list, people are going to take the path of least resistance, which is going to be a larger program where you can kind of disappear into it. And so you're right. It needs to be a key component, and it needs to be clear why people should be in small groups, why it's a part of the pathway and not just another thing to show up for.
And I love the reminder of the leadership and modeling coming from the senior pastor. We would never, you could never imagine a scenario where the senior pastor would have a high value on Sunday worship and then not participate in Sunday worship. And so the same principle certainly applies for a small group strategy. If it's going to be healthy, if it's really going to be a part of who you are as a church, then the senior pastor needs to model that as well. I love that. All right, Chris Brown, that is. One of the real reasons why I wanted to bring you into the conversation is I know for many, many years, small groups has been a core to the strategy of North Coast Church. In fact, the whole sticky church concept is really built on that, small groups really being the foundation of that. So could you talk a little bit about how North Coast has made small groups such a part of the overall strategy of growing and discipling people?
Sure. And I would preface it just by saying I've been here 12 years as a senior pastor. So anything I'm saying really comes from a team that's here and has been here before me. I'm going to use their words. I'm going to use their phrases. And if they're watching right now, they're even going to know that and go, that wasn't even your idea. It's not just the core of discipleship. It is the church at North Coast. And I couldn't agree more with what Chris said. It has to come from senior leadership down. I think every senior leader says, hey, we want to have a small group. We want to have that relationship model. But are you willing to do what it takes to do that? Are you willing to sacrifice everything else? At North Coast, we repeatedly say, if you're here on the weekend, we're good to see you, glad you're here, but you're part of the crowd. If you ever want to become part of the church, you got to be in a small group. Church is done in circles, not in rows. Church is done in dialogue, not in monologue. All those little sayings that I don't even know where they started, but people are using them all over the country today. But you got to put your money where your mouth is. We have more staff, more budget, more salaries into our small group, what we call growth group area, than any other part of the church. And when I go to churches and they're frustrated because they don't have the signups, I look exactly what Chris said. Their menu is huge. Here in California, we have a phenomenal burger place, a chain called In-N-Out, and I know it's on the West Coast. When you walk into In-N-Out Burger, you have very limited things to choose from. You have a burger, a double burger, fries, and a shake. That's it. If anyone stands in line looking at that menu board for more than 5 seconds, they don't need to be there. As opposed to a Jack in the Box, where you can get salads, you can get rolled tacos, you can get food from 5 continents. They both have their place, but we here talk about being a simple church, and that is we're going to make growth groups everything, and we're going to take everything else off the menu board. That includes, sports teams. That includes having softball nights. That includes having a big children's event midweek, because we think everyone's going to give you about 2 time spots. If they're committed to your church, they'll come on the weekend and they'll give you something else. And we don't want anything else to compete with our one thing, and that's small groups. So we take everything else off the menu. We push people to that's it. Your uber committed people may give you a service time, may give you a place where they serve. The ministry monsters that may give you 3 or 4 spots. But we really guard against the 2 spots people are going to give us. If you come to North Coast on the weekend, you're part of the crowd. If you want to get involved in anything else, be something else, the only option on the board is small groups. And we believe that's not just a front door, like Chris said, in growing a church. That closes the back door. And so when you get them into that group and they're connected, they're going to stay.
That's good. That's good stuff. Well, we have the honor at the Unstuck group of really being able to work with all kinds of churches all across the country, actually into Canada and the UK. We're working with a church in Costa Rica right now. Across the board, of course, all different denominations, all different sizes, across the board, everybody trying to figure out, though, how can we reach more people for Jesus and help folks take their next steps toward Christ? And one of the fun stories from the last several years, we had the opportunity a few years ago to work with Northbrook Church in Richfield, Wisconsin. Great church. And they have experienced in these last years, it's just been phenomenal growth as well, moving from about 700 to over 2,000 in attendance. But what's been remarkable, in addition to that growth, is the engagement that they're getting from folks in the church. And Pastor Mike contacted me recently, was talking about they have seen 80-90% of the people in their church connected into small groups. And Chris, well, I'll get back to you in a moment, and I'm curious to know if you have some stats on this. When we go into churches, we always ask the question, how many people do you have connected into groups or Sunday school or things along those lines? And on average, what we see is about 50% of adults and students. Some far better, some honestly far worse. And so for us to see a church like this engaging 80 to 90%, that's quite remarkable. So I asked Pastor Mike, what is it? What allowed you to get to that level of engagement? And these were the things that he listed. He said, first of all, we prioritized leadership development. We knew that if this area of our ministry was going to grow and we were going to get this level of engagement, we were going to need the leaders to support that. And so having an intentional path around leadership development, they aligned their staff around their strategy. And so they kind of wiped the slate clean, looked at what is our overall strategy going to look like to help people take these next steps, including their small group strategy, and they aligned their staff around that. They focused their strategy. In fact, he said they wiped everything off the plate. They eliminated all their other classes. They eliminated all their other learning environments. And every next step beyond the weekend service was focused on a small group. He acknowledged, too, I'm in a group and I'm modeling for others. This is what we do at the church. In fact, they don't have a new membership class at Northfield. Instead, they have everybody go through a group experience instead. They want to show people from their very first steps they're taking at the church, this is what small group engagement looks like. And I love that because you hear all of those aspects of what's included in their strategy now, and you recognize this isn't just a side program. This isn't part of that full menu of things that we do as a church. This is the strategy. It's small groups. So Chris Surratt, I want to get back to you. First of all, any data that you have on kind of what the average, what the typical engagement is, so that we can kind of benchmark how are we doing as far as our group strategy? Do you have a sense of that, Chris?
I think actually 50% is pretty good. I think that's actually strong. From what we see, typically it's closer to 40% across the board for people that are engaged in either Sunday school or small groups. So 50 is actually not bad at all as far as an average. Going back to the church you're talking about, what I love is the intentionality that goes into it. And when I first kind of discovered aligning staff was when I read Sticky Church by Larry Osborne. And it rocked my world because he talked about how every staff member had to lead a small group, and that was not negotiable. And the fact that the church you're talking about has just aligned their entire staff, their programming, their budget, that's the key to why they have over 90%.
Yeah. So Chris, you mentioned it in the beginning too. You talked about this. It's not just a growth engine spiritually in our discipleship strategy, but also you said it's a growth engine for churches as well. And I think part of that is how you see churches effectively using groups as really part of their outreach strategy as well. And I know this was part of what you experienced in your time both at Seacoast and also at Crosspoint Church too. So could you talk a little bit about that, how the outreach strategy actually fits into your group's strategy?
Yeah, I love how groups, like Chris said, can close the back door. I do think that they do that because they connect people into community and people are looking for that. But I think we miss it when we just focus on the back door. And I think that small groups can be a key evangelism piece for our churches. We really utilize campaigns at both of my churches. And with campaigns, we set up our leaders and hosts to really invite their neighbors and coworkers and friends before even people that were in the church. That the goal of the campaign was not necessarily to get all the people in the church into groups, but to actually reach out to people who hadn't come to church yet, and this could be a first step for them. We looked at how stickier could it be, the invite, if it starts with a relationship, if it starts with a neighbor that's invited over for a dinner with their small group, and it's no pressure, and that's where it starts. And then they see the pastor on a video teaching for 10 to 15 minutes before they go on Sunday morning. And I think with that, there's a couple things. I think one, we have to be comfortable with the fact that they may not show up to church the next week. That small group experience may lead to a few weeks or a few months or even a year before they even decide to visit the church. And that's okay. We have to be okay with that. And then two, we have to decide where's going to be the bar for our leadership, for our small group leadership. The higher that you set the bar for the leadership, the better quality groups that you're going to have. If you set the bar really high, you're probably going to have good groups, biblical groups. You're going to be able to count on the experience that your people are getting, because you have a lot of training and you're picking seasoned leaders. And if you set the bar low, you're not going to have as many quality groups, but you're going to have more groups. You're going to have a bigger quantity. So it's figuring out, okay, where are we comfortable? Are we comfortable with lowering that bar, a little bit or a lot, so that we can open up our group strategy to be even a bigger evangelism tool for us? Because if we start saying, hey, you know what, you can host a group, you can invite your friends and neighbors, and we're gonna provide the curriculum and the training on the DVD. You're gonna open up the front door for your small groups at your church.
That's great. Love that. And you started to reference campaigns. And so I want to kind of shift focus because, again, fall's right around the corner. And so I'd love to talk, guys, about some ways that we can help churches prepare for what's going to happen this fall, looking at the fall launch. And Chris Brown, I'll go to you first. This is kind of reverse order from what I was planning. So you guys can do this, can't you? You can play with me. I know, throwing a curveball. Chris Brown, let me just put you on the spot. Maybe not you personally, but the team.
Okay.
Church. I'm assuming as the senior pastor, teaching pastor, you have others on the team with you helping in this area?
Quite a few.
Okay, good. So how's the team preparing right now for what's going to be happening this fall? Here, we're still in the summer, but fall's around the corner. How do you approach this? Is this a natural on-ramp for you as a church? And what specifically are you doing now to prepare for what would happen in the coming months?
This is a huge on-ramp for us as the church. And right now, summer is one of the busiest times. We actually take our small group system off in the summer. So we're on a quarter system. We have people in 10 weeks in the fall. The holiday season, there's several weeks off because everyone's traveling, going, kids are out of school. We come back, we have 10 weeks that you're committed to in the winter, 10 weeks in the spring, and then summers are off. But for our growth group team, all of our growth group pastors and their staff, this is the busiest time because this is where we are recruiting leaders. And so exactly like Chris said, you want to guard that front door. I love the church that you mentioned because it's the same here at North Coast. For over 29 years, we've had over 80% of our weekend attendance in a small group. For the last 5 years, we've been over 90% of our adults are in a small group. And so we're running about 10,500 right now. In the summer, we'll be 11,500 or 12,000 in the fall. 90% of people in the small group takes a lot of work. And that's what our team's doing right now. They're going through and they're vetting all of our future leaders. They're looking for more leaders. They're looking for more groups. And that's why we said at the beginning, you've got to be committed to this process, because that's not an ad in the bulletin. That's not one person in charge of groups, having 4 coffees. That's 400 to 500 people that are being looked at, that are being sought after, that are saying, are you the next small group leader? And we're primarily getting that from our small groups. I love what Chris said about where you set the bar. We throw our bar on the ground so almost anybody can step over it. We're not looking for a theologian or a professor to lead a group. We're not asking you to take 10 classes on how to lead a group before you lead it. We just want someone to facilitate a conversation, because we're sermon-based. Your teacher is what you heard on the weekend. Your teacher was the message. And by the way, that's another great way to get people hearing your messages. Everyone that missed the message that weekend because they were at the river or they were at the soccer game, they click on it and they watch it online. Our hits from our people during the week are through the roof because they know you got to make the message. That's 70% of your homework.
Yeah. And I think that's a key point, and I don't want to gloss over that. So I hope you caught that. I guess for years, I don't know from the beginning, Chris, North Coast has not been using separate curriculum for small groups. It's not a variety of different topics that groups can choose from. You keep all your groups on the same page, using a curriculum discussion guide based on the message itself, correct?
Correct, because again, our groups are primarily relational. I mean, it's really discipleship driven, because our homework, you could do it in 10 minutes if you want to sit out in front of the house you're going to with the flashlight in your mouth and scribble down some answers, and that'll pass. Or you can spend 2 hours on your homework. But the main goal is to get believers together discussing the message and talking about how does this fit your life? How do you apply it? If the leader is teaching, they're working on preparation and they're teaching. You can either teach or you can build relationships. You can't do both while leading a group. And so we don't want our leaders to be teaching. We don't want them to be preparing and doing a Bible study. We want them to be facilitating relationship and discussion. And so there's times we always have about 15% of our groups that take a season off to do a book study on marriage and love and respect or something that they're dealing with, but they always come back to sermon base. And it's always about coming together and saying, okay, we heard a message. Now it's become the church. How do you do all the one another's that Scripture tells us to do? You can't do that in a Sunday if you're sitting in a row looking in one direction.
That's good. And by the way, on that note, before we conclude, Chris Surratt, I want to make sure you have some time to share some of the tools that your team has helped develop to make, whether it's message-based groups or just getting all your group leaders on the same page, some great tools so that they don't have to be focusing on the curriculum. There are tools your team has helped pull together to do that, and the leaders can just be focused primarily on relationships. So we'll come back to that. But Chris, I want, on this topic of launches, from your experience, can you share some strategies on what you're seeing working in churches when it comes to this focused campaign launch for the fall?
Yeah, and I want to say that Chris's numbers of 95% is unbelievable, and what you said, over 90%, and we saw the same thing at Crosspoint. Over 90% of our adults were connected to groups, and that was a church of 8,000. And so I just want to say that is possible. You can do it with intentionality. And the best way that I've seen for getting there and starting a lot of new groups, because again, the study showed that when churches start new groups, they grow. The best way to start a lot of groups or a few groups at one time is through a dedicated campaign. And what that looks like, the way that we did it at my church, is we would do 2 large campaigns a year, and they would center around big growth seasons for us. So for us, that was fall, August, September, and then again in January, February, because people are kind of New Year's resolutions and all of that. So we would do a 6-week concentrated campaign where all of our groups would study the same thing. And just like Chris was saying, our groups were probably 75% message based. So a lot of them were doing that anyway, but we would put more intentionality into it by shooting just real simple videos with our pastor, our teaching pastor, talking about the topic that he's going to be talking about on Sunday that groups can dig into. We would write our studies to go along with it, and then all of our groups would launch a huge campaign together, and we would start a lot of brand new groups, host groups, and say, here's your curriculum. We would shoot real quick training, like 2 to 3 minute training that would be on a DVD. Here's how you invite people. Here's how you put your dogs and cats away for the meetings, and stuff, little stuff like that people don't get, but we would give it to them. We would say, do this for 6 weeks. That's all we're asking for. And so they would do that. And then in about week 2 or 3, our coaches, because we had coaches that would help out with the new leaders and the new host leaders, would check in and say, how's it going? If it's going great, we'd love for you to continue for another 6 weeks. And about 75 to 80% of our host groups would continue on, and we would give them their next 6 weeks, which, oh, by the way, also went along with the message series the next message series that we're about to do. So that's kind of how we would start it, introduce it. And we would start a couple months ahead of time, 2 or 3 months, sync up with the teaching pastor, see where he's going, start writing curriculum, start shooting videos. And then we would start recruiting coaches, and we would start recruiting new hosts, and that would come from the stage. So the senior pastor would get up for 3 weeks and say, you know what, we're going to do this series. It's going to be the biggest one our church has ever done. You're going to want to be a part of it. You're going to want to host a group. So we would recruit hosts. And then we would, launch it with a big day, big connect event, make sure as many people as possible knew about it, get into groups. And that's how we would launch our campaigns. And we would launch anywhere from, and this is a large church, but anywhere from 200 to 300 brand new groups every time we did a campaign. And then out of that, at least 75% of them would continue on. So that's a pretty good percentage of success when it comes to groups starting. I don't know a better way of doing it than doing a concentrated campaign.
That's good. That's very good. All right. So Chris Surratt, let me continue with you. Chris Brown mentioned that actually the church in Wisconsin, we talked about, both of them talked about leaders and the priority of leadership. You mentioned it, raising the bar on leaders. And that's one of the common questions that we had ramping up to today's webinar was, how do you, when small groups rely so much on quality leaders, how do you raise the bar? How do you develop leaders? How do you find the folks that can carry the load when it comes to equipping the leaders for these group environments? So can you give some advice on that?
Sure. And I think there's a couple ways to do it. I think one is what Chris said, basically stomping on the bar, which is what we did as well with our host groups. So I think there can be an entry level of you're a host. We didn't even call it a leader. We said you're a host and you're just going to invite people and you're going to facilitate a conversation. And so again, that's that basic, here's some just how you invite people, real easy training for them. And then I think there's a next level for us, which was kind of a leader. So we called them community group leaders, and they definitely need more training, more, a little bit more support at the beginning. And so there was a little bit of a bar for that. We asked that they, basically they know the church strategy, they believe in it, they attend our church, they're believers. And so we had more training for them. Most of it was online because we were a multi-site church. So getting everybody together was very difficult for training. So we would put these kind of 5 to 10 minute video trainings online where they would answer some questions to it. And then we had ongoing training that was basically through our coaches. And that's what we called as needed training, because most of the questions that new leaders are going to have are going to come up while they're leading the group. I mean, we can prep them with how do you lead a conversation? How do you facilitate a conversation? We can prep them with some of those things, but most of the issues that they're going to have are going to come up while they're doing it. And so we would equip our coaches to be able to hopefully, help them, come alongside them. So when they have a question, we'd say, reach out to your coach. They can help you. They're seasoned leaders. They've probably seen it. If they haven't, one of our pastors on staff has, and so we can help you along with that. So, it was all the way from here's a DVD to here's some more online training, and here's some as-needed guidance as you go along with your coaches. And I think the key there is having some kind of coaching system, whatever you want to call it, a soul care system that leaders, especially new leaders, can lean on as they go along.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, Chris, anything you want to add as far as leadership development is concerned on that?
Yeah, I would just add that what we ask is that everyone's in a group for at least a year. It gives us two things. It gives us this idea that they know our DNA, they know how a group works, they understand what the process is about. But more importantly, it gives us a small group leader who's worked with them for a year, and they've vetted them. So they know after a year of being in a group with someone, you pretty much know their singleness or their marriage partner, what's happening in the family. And so we try to get all of our leaders back out of our small group system. So when I say that we set the bar incredibly low, it's not like anybody from the street can just walk in and say, hey, I'm new here. We put them in a group. But it is. We're not looking at, again, a theology major. We're not looking at a professor. We're just looking at someone to facilitate adult conversation around the curriculum that we've created for them. And so we want someone that's been a believer for at least a year, has been in a group, understands who we are and what we do. And then exactly what Chris said. We've got about 15 different growth group pastors that are going to be over that area. Everyone has a pastor over their group that they know they can go to. There's always a night where they're like, oh my gosh, this came up, or I have no idea how to handle it. And we want to make sure they have plenty of safety nets around them, but give them a lot of freedom just to walk on it. And let me just also throw out, I love what Chris was saying about how they did their groups, sat down with the teaching pastor, planned out months ahead of time, videos. But there's got to be a bunch of people listening to this going, my senior pastor doesn't know what he's doing Sunday. In other words, they're working with a guy like me. I'm going into our sermon prep class. It's what we call it in about a half hour. And I still don't know what I'm teaching on this week. And I have an idea, but I had a busy week. I was gone. We're going to flesh it out. The person that writes our growth group homework is in that class. They hear it for the first time. The group tank's going to give me a think tank on my message. We're going to give the last 10, 15 minutes to our growth group homework writer. They're going to have it. So if you're in a process, this can be done a week out. We do all of ours the Tuesday of. So my fill in the blanks I have to be due by Thursday at 2. The growth group homework questions come in Thursday at 2. But we always do ours just the week of, the questions that go with the homework. So there's other ways to do it. If you can do a Chris's model, that's probably better on the whole team. But a lot of you got stuck with a guy like me, and it's week of.
Well, and let me give you another option. One of the churches I was a part of, the lay volunteer team that prepared the Bible study discussion guides would listen to the service for the message for the first time on Saturday night. And then by Sunday evening, they would have the guide ready and distributed out to all the small group leaders. So yes, Chris's model is probably ideal, and it's probably in the long run going to be better content and better as far as the quality of what's being offered for everybody. But there are ways to do it that still keep everybody on the same page. Chris, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I should follow up with Chris. What I was describing, we did 2 times a year. And so those were the only times that we were able to pull it together that ahead of time. Okay. And there were seasons where we weren't able to, and we used off-the-shelf curriculum for our campaigns. We did 40 Days of Love from Saddleback, and that was a huge hit for us because we couldn't get things, on the same page. And so that's not the only way. And our week-to-week, I would get the message notes if I was lucky by Thursday, a lot of times Friday or Saturday, or sitting on Sunday. And that was our natural rhythm for writing our weekly questions, which is when we discovered smallgroup.com, which I'll probably talk about a little bit later.
Definitely. All right, so let's shift focus. This third area I wanted to hit is, okay, now we've launched the groups. We've had the campaign. What are the systems or the tools that we can have in place to sustain a healthy groups strategy moving forward? So Chris Surratt, what do you see? What are some important tools? And I don't know, maybe this is where you would want to reference what your team has put together at smallgroup.com, but what are some tools that you see being used to help groups not only as they launch, but to sustain for the long run?
Yeah, I think The biggest part of it for me is being willing to fund your small group ministry, your discipleship ministry. We put so much of our budget into the weekend, and that's important, that a lot of times there's nothing left over for discipleship, for the small groups. I'm reminded of the passage in Exodus where the Pharaoh basically said, you need to build as many bricks, but this time you're going to do it without the straw. And that's kind of what we do a lot of times with our small group team, our discipleship team, is we say, we want you to have small groups. We want them to be healthy. We want them to grow, but we're not going to fund it. We're not going to give any money toward it. So I think it's so key that as you look at your budget, are you funding your discipleship pathway? Are you funding your small groups? And is it a priority for you? If it's not, it's probably never going to be a priority for you. But I think it's key that you give your leaders the right resources. And for us at my church, that did come down to how do we give them the right content? Because 75 to 80% of our groups, we're doing message-based questions, which was huge for us. And I was writing all of them every week and doing my best to come up with my 6 to 7 questions. If I could get lucky and get it ahead of time, a lot of times Sunday mornings. And we decided that the content was important, that we needed something that had more scripture, that they could go in more in depth if they needed to. And we needed to figure out a way to do that. And that's when we discovered smallgroup.com, which Lifeway Christian Resources launched a couple years ago. And it's an online database of now over 2,000 pre-built Bible studies that you can customize for your groups. It's on every book of the Bible, over 400 topics. There's now video enhanced studies, with people like Beth Moore, Priscilla Shire, and Tony Evans, if you want to use those. But the way that we used it is I would plug in my pastor's topic or the scripture. It would spit out a bunch of studies that were based on that. I would take those, customize them, put in my pastor's quotes and things like that. In about 30 to 45 minutes, I had a great study with a lot of scriptures, a lot of perspective that I would have never been able to build. But the reason we were able to do that is we put funding toward it and decided content is important. We need to make sure what we're putting into our group leaders' hands leads to discipleship conversations that need to happen. And so I think that's key, is thinking about beyond the campaign, beyond those 6 weeks, what's next, and help your leaders be equipped with the curriculum and with what they need to take their groups beyond that initial 6 weeks.
That's good. And by the way, I just want to, again, reinforce Chris Brown and Chris Surratt have both said it. And actually, I think this principle applies not only to small groups, but really every area of our ministry. I would much rather pay staff to develop relationships, to develop leaders, to build teams, and not to be writing curriculum. So for the small groups pastor, I would rather them have the tools, make the financial investment, whatever it takes, so that they're not having to spend as much time on curriculum, but they're more in leadership development, building teams, and actually developing relationships. Same for small group leaders. Same for youth pastors. Same for kids ministry leaders. I'd rather kids ministry buy an off-the-shelf curriculum and not have to spend time developing kids curriculum, and rather be pouring into adult leaders and kids and things like that. That's a much better valuable, much better use of staff dollars than having someone locked in an office someplace just trying to craft curriculum. So I wanted to reinforce that. Chris Brown, one of the questions that we got pretty frequently leading up to today was this one. It's around the open versus closed groups. So trying to get a sense of what you're doing at North Coast, what's worked and what hasn't. And related to that is helping churches helping small groups rather than having an insider focus, looking at even their group relationships as more outsider focused. So can you address that? They're kind of related. If not, pretend they are related.
Okay. Well, I'll pretend they're related, but I'm not going to pretend I'm going to give you the answer maybe you're looking for, because here we want our groups to be focused on themselves, not to be outsider focused. We don't have an open chair. We don't have an open spot philosophy where we want to keep bringing new people. We never split our groups for the purpose of multiplication. Because then we believe you're going to have a lot of people that are pretending to be friendly, but they're not really wanting to make new friends. All of us, we use the little Lego kind of model here. And there's different sized Lego blocks, and they all have different connectors on them. Some have 2 connectors, some have 10. Then you have the great big board that you can put all the houses on. And people are like that. People only have a certain amount of connecting spots. And once those spots are filled, they have their friends. And they'll be friendly, but they're not going to add anyone to. In fact, they can't add anyone to their block. All the connectors are taken. And so we want to get people in the group and build those lifelong relationships. We got groups here at North Coast that met as young married couples, raised kids, went through marrying kids, and now all have grandkids. And they've been in the same group for 30 years here at North Coast. And we absolutely love that. And so we get groups together. Connectors. They're moving away from a friend base. So now they've got open connectors. We make groups of new people with new people. Now they're not just pretending to be friendly. They'll actually take you out to dinner. They'll actually have you over for a barbecue. You're going to meet me on campus, and you're going to think I'm one of the friendliest guys ever. And you're like, we should do dinner sometime. And I'm going to look at you and go, I can't do dinner with you for the next 20 years. I've got so many spots that are taken. I've got people I'm taking off when they're not looking and putting on connectors. I've got staff I'm trying to get to have dinner with. I'm friendly, but I'm not going to be your friend. And maybe that sounds odd as a pastor saying it, but that's the reality of life. So we try to keep our groups together. Their connectors are there, launch them, and then bring in everyone else that's looking to make friends, put them in the same group because they all have open connectors, and launch them. So again, 3 times a year, we're going to do the signups. 3 times a year, we're going to get people together. 3 times a year, we're going to do a big campaign with videos on the weekend. And man, if you're not in a group, you got to sign up. This is what North Coast is all about. The plaza is going to be filled with tents and easy ups and places to sign up. We're going to make it as easy as possible. And I think that's a trick that a lot of people miss. They want their people to commit to growth groups. We ask for very, very little commitment. We kind of call it the pink spoon approach, 31 flavors. And you can tell I'm a chubby guy. I've got a burger analogy and a pink spoon analogy. And that's what we do. At 31 flavors, when you walk in, you realize they have a corporate policy. They don't cut you off from trying. You can try all 31 flavors. And you think that's a lousy business model. You're giving away your product. No, it's brilliant. They know that once you taste it, you're going to buy a gallon of Rocky Road and you're going to go home and watch TV and fall asleep. They understand it. Growth groups are the same way. We just want you to try it for 10 weeks. But you know what? Just go once. And if the house is funky, if they haven't put their cats away, if it's a crazy cultic environment, just run. Get out of there. And we always make a joke about it. We say it that way, and people go, oh, I just have to show up once. And I go, commit to 10 weeks, but you know what? Show up once or twice. If you don't like it, never show up again. You have my permission. It's a pink spoon. Let them try it. And we believe the Holy Spirit's going to do what the Holy Spirit promised to do. Believers together around the Word of God, it's going to stick.
All right, Chris, before we shift to Q&A, do you want to concur or take a different position on what Chris shared?
No, actually, I absolutely agree. The mantra that we used was new groups for new people, new groups for new people. Yeah. We were all about starting new groups for new people. When somebody would come in, maybe it wasn't during a sign up, but it was kind of in between, and they wanted to be a part of a group, our first response to them was, would you like to start a group? Do you have some friends that you can invite that you can start a new group? We didn't split or multiply. We kind of looked at it as, you have a group of friends in real life. Nobody ever comes up and goes, you know what, you guys have been together for too long. We're going to take these and we're going to put them over there and they're going to be friends together. And then you guys are going to be friends over here. That's not how life works. And so I don't think that's how small groups should work. There seems to be a relational, organic piece of these small groups, and that's what it's about. So I completely agree with that. I do think that there are some groups can be more open, and we would encourage group leaders that if they have a neighbor that could fit in with their group, that they can invite, and all of that, do it. So we were a little softer on that. We didn't completely say you need to be closed. But on the same thing, if we would stick a brand new person into an existing group, but they didn't know anybody, it was kind of like, if you ever started a new high school and you walked in and everybody around you knew the jokes, and knew the language and you just felt lost, even if they were the most friendly people in the world, you still were a couple years behind. Well, that's what it's like to join a new group where you don't know anyone. So I definitely believe in what Chris was talking
and
about.
Again, the purpose for us, we want a place where you can do life-on-life discipleship. How long does it take for you to build relationships with a group of strangers before you start talking about your marriage, your pornography, your finances? I know we've had the same group meeting in my living room now for 12 years. And it wasn't until around year 3 or 4 that we started to see some real openness. And so if you're constantly moving people in and out, you're just not building that trust to go, I can really talk about my marriage here. As soon as the new person comes in, boy, it's another year or two before I'm really talking about my marriage.
All right. So for you teaching pastors out there, unlike your messages where you just go on and on until you're finished, we're going to stick to an end time today. Sorry about that, Chris Brown.
Yeah.
So before we get to the Q&A, so that we can finish on time, let me, many of you, I'm sure, are hearing all this and you're just looking for more resources. So let me offer a few for you. First of all, at the conclusion of today's webinar, we're going to offer you a free download, which will be a planning guide to help you launch small groups this fall. So we want you to be successful with some of the strategies we talked about. And thanks to Chris Surratt and his team and folks here at the Unstuck group, we think we have a very practical resource to help you have success with your launch of groups this fall. Secondly, Chris Surratt mentioned it, smallgroup.com, small group, no S, smallgroup.com. You should check it out. Our team's been on it. We've been referring churches to it. Again, a great resource for you to help with the curriculum development. It really makes it easy. I mean, great content there. There's a format that the smallgroup.com team has developed that gets people in the Bible. It provides good discussion questions. There's a good flow to the format that they've created. And so I would encourage you to check it out, smallgroup.com. And then the third resource I'd like to mention is just you need to have a plan. You need to have a strategy for how you're going to allow for your church to get healthy, to impact more people. And that's what we do at the Unstuck group, is we help churches figure out, where do you believe God's called you as a church? What's the big picture vision for where you're headed next? But then, more importantly, what are the next steps you're going to take to get there? That's the strategy. And so there is a strategic planning process that's part of what we do at the Unstuck group, which will help you weigh, how do we fit this focus on groups into our overall strategy so that our church can be healthier and so that we can reach more people for Jesus. So if you're interested in that, I would encourage you to jump on the website, theunstuckgroup.com, and click the start button. Let's start a conversation about how we can help you. All right, Michael, I know you've been going through the questions with online, and there are a lot of questions here. And so with limited time, I'm just going to jump to a few that stuck out to me. Chris Surratt, I'm going to put, and by the way, we're going to treat this as a speed round, guys. So let's try to get through as many of these questions as we can. So Chris Surratt, here's a biggie. It's the question of small groups versus Sunday school. How do you deal with that?
I think that the key there is the verses. It doesn't have to be verses. I honestly believe that Sunday school and small groups can coexist. I think that you need expectations for both. What do they look like? Is it a teacher download information? You can have community in a Sunday school class. It can happen. I've seen it. I actually write a little bit about it in my book, but I believe that it shouldn't be verses. And if you're a Sunday school church, please don't kill your Sunday school classes and go small groups one Sunday. You won't have a job. So I think it is possible for them to both exist, and you just need clear expectations.
All right, Chris Brown, let's hear from you at North Coast. This is a question about training leaders, and you hit on this a little bit, but implied here, I know some churches have also moved to a coaching structure for leaders. Does such a thing exist at North Coast? What does that look like?
Yeah, we've broken all of our, I think we got 575 growth groups launching this fall. We've broken all those down under campus pastors and under growth group pastors. So everyone has a smaller group of growth groups they're involved in, a pastor they can report to, and they do training throughout the year. We do it on Sunday morning during the service time, so it's not an extra time slot for you. It's going to be in another room on campus, but you bring your kids, drop them off in childcare or Sunday school, and you're going to go to growth group training, and you're going to have about 4 of those throughout the year. They're going to be pretty simple. You know, how to keep the discussion questions going, how to deal with difficult people in your group, or EGRs as we call them, extra grace required. And so you always have those touch points. You always have some training. And you, like I said, you always have a safety net with the pastor over you that's going to know you, how your group's going, what do you need, and constant follow-up in case you're like, hey, I'm not doing this well, or what if.
Chris Surratt, anything else you want to add on coaching?
We used volunteer coaches for the most part. We just didn't have that many staff to dedicate to it. And what we developed was what we called as-needed coaching. So not all of our leaders had a coach, only if they wanted a coach. And so a seasoned leader had the choice that, you know, we'll provide you a coach, or, you know, you don't have to. All of our new hosts and leaders were required to have a coach for at least the first year. And so we had coaches. And the key for us for that working was the handoff was done with the coach. And so when we had a new host sign up, we would actually meet together, the small group director at their campus and the coach with the new host or leader, and it would be kind of an organic handoff instead of here's an email, here's a phone number, they're going to be calling you. And I think that was key for them accepting that coach into their system.
All right, so some of this about caring for leaders is going to help, but with this next question. But the question is, how do you prevent leader burnout? And Chris Brown, it sounds like one of the key strategies for you is you actually take the summer off, right?
We take the summer off. We take 4 weeks over the Christmas holidays off. We take 2 weeks over Easter off. And people go, well, the summer's off. You know, wouldn't it be better for your groups to meet year round? It may be better for the groups, but it's not better for the leaders. And we have a little mantra here going back to the Pony Express days. We always say the pony is more important than the mail. You may have a delivery system and messages, but if the horse dies, that mail isn't getting anywhere. So we always look for the leader health and care more importantly than the group. When you have the summer off, your groups are going to get barbecue for 4th of July. Our group all met at our house again. We had a backyard party. You're ready to go again in the fall. Man, our retention rate is through the roof. You know, over 85% of our people want to go back and lead a group, want to go back and host a group because they've been away from them for 2.5 months. They can't wait to see them again, 3 months actually, and they're going to gear up for another year. And they know it's only 10 weeks. We'll get 3 or 4 weeks over Christmas off, and we'll be ready to do it again.
So here's next question. It has to do with the ideal number of people for group. Chris Surratt, do you want to take this?
Sure. I think, you know, I've heard the kind of statistic 8 plus 4 minus 4. I don't know where that came from, but that seems to be a pretty good figure to put it on. I think you can have too small of groups, honestly. You know, for a community group, I think you can have an accountability group that's maybe 2 or 3 people, and that's a good thing. But if you have a regular small group community group that gets kind of under 4, it has a hard time getting traction because if, you know, 1 or 2 people can't make it a week, then it's awkward and it's so I think that's a problem. And then I think you can also get too large with the group because conversation kind of stalls. Not everybody can jump in. Good sizes have large enough space, like your house is subdividing your group, which we always encourage, especially couples groups. Subdivide a lot, you know, put guys in one room, put women in the other room, because that's the only way that couples groups are going to really be open and share their lives. Guys aren't going to talk about certain stuff in front of their wives and vice versa. So, but I think that, you know, 8 plus 4 minus 4 is probably a pretty good rule of thumb to go with a healthy small group.
All right, you mentioned men. I saw a question here about male leaders, just the challenge of getting men to lead too. Either one of you have perspective on that? Because I mean, I don't know. I know, well, I don't want to overgeneralize the male species, but when it comes down to small groups and relationships, for a lot of us, this just doesn't come naturally. So it's almost like you're working against the grain in some respects when it comes to getting men to both commit to a group, but also then to take the next step of lead a group.
I'll go first. I'm sure Chris has great ideas, but we struggled with men's groups. I mean, getting them started. We had tons of women's groups, and that was no problem. We were buying Beth Moore curriculum nonstop, but men's groups were difficult. And kind of what we figured out is we were expecting men to kind of become what we thought a small group should be. So what we started doing is going to guys and kind of asking them just to continue what you're already doing with your guy friends, but let's put some curriculum into it. Let's put some organization into it. And so, for instance, we had a group of guys that got together every week and they smoked cigars. And so they started doing curriculum. They started doing a study out on their back porch with the cigar smoke, and they actually multiplied. And there was like 4 or 5 smoky backyards in Nashville because of these cigar smoking men's groups. We had another men's group that got together and watched Monday Night Football. And then at halftime, they would do their study, and then they'd watch the second half. And so I think it's figuring out how can we go to where guys already are, where they're already doing their thing, and then just kind of come alongside them instead of saying, you know what, you need to stop what you're doing. You need to do it this way with a bunch of guys. And I think that's where it gets a little bit.
All right, Chris Brown, don't answer that question. This is the last question. Can groups work for both Christians and non-Christians?
Me not to answer that question?
No, I want you to answer that one, not the one that Chris Surratt just answered.
I took too long.
It can, but I think the purpose is going to be different. You're no longer about discipleship. By definition, discipleship is a follower. We love when new people come. We'll find out all the time that, wow, 2 or 3 of the couples in this group aren't even Christian. They've been coming to church for a few weeks. They decided to take a deeper investment, and along the way. So again, we don't have groups for non-Christians. We keep a discipleship focus, just knowing when we start new groups with new people, chances are you're going to have some decisions in that group because they're just getting into what's the Bible, what's going on, what's it look like. So we love that they're in there, but we don't have 2 separate focuses. Unapologetically, we're discipleship driven. If a non-Christian wants to come and join that journey, great. Along the way, they're either going to choose to be a disciple or go, man, this isn't for me. But that's the purpose of our groups.
All right. Love it. Hey, guys, thank you for joining us today. Again, just to wrap, let me give you this encouragement of how we'll continue to resource you. Number 1, we will email you a link to that small group campaign planning guide that I mentioned. So you'll be getting that shortly after the webinar. In addition, we will email you a replay of today's webinar. So, if you have a friend who really needs to hear all of the great things that were shared today, including that great illustration about the pink spoon that Chris Brown shared. Way to go, Chris Brown. You're good with the anecdotes. You'll get a copy of today's webinar that you can share with your friends. Remember, and by the way, it's not just check out smallgroup.com. Chris Surratt, quick, is there a free trial that we're offering too? Is that what's happening here?
Yes, if you go to smallgroup.com, you can sign up for 2 weeks absolutely free. Use the entire site. There's no obligation.
Awesome. And then finally, again, if there's any way that the Unstuck group can help you with your planning, including how to incorporate this growth strategy by using groups, we would love to walk alongside you. So you can go to the unstuckgroup.com and let us know if you'd like to start a conversation about how we can help you assess your health, plan for the future, put the structure in place to support that strategy. We'd love to come alongside you. All right, Chris and Chris, you guys were a great duo. Thanks for joining us today. And thanks for everybody else too that joined us for the conversation. Praying that your group launch this fall is successful. I'm pulling for you. I want you to continue to reach more people for Jesus and help them take steps toward Jesus as well. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm sure we'll connect again soon.